My husband called me a disgrace in front of his wealthy friends, and the words sliced through me sharper than any blade. He did it casually, almost as though humiliation were part of the entertainment, part of the evening's performance for his chosen audience. The laughter that followed was hollow and cruel, like champagne glasses clinking over a toast I hadn't been invited to join. I sat frozen at that long mahogany table while waiters carried away empty plates, my cheeks burning in the candlelight. Then he left me, just like that, to pay for a $4,000 dinner I hadn't ordered, hadn't enjoyed, and hadn't deserved. Before I continue narrating the story of Savannah, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. This wasn't the first time Jonah had turned my life into theater, but it was certainly the most public. I remember staring at the leather folder with the bill tucked inside, my name scribbled across the reservation line as if I had arranged the whole debacle myself. The faces around me shifted uncomfortably, some pretending to check their phones, others offering sympathetic smirks that stung even worse than the laughter. I slipped my hand into my clutch, knowing I had exactly one card Jonah didn't control. It wasn't much, but it was enough to carry me through this moment, enough to stop the shame from multiplying. The ride home that night stretched endlessly across the city's glittering lights, the kind of view that normally comforted me. But the reflection in the cab window was not of a wife cherished, nor of a woman respected. It was of someone Jonah had carefully whittled down over years, shaping me into a shadow that only lived under his spotlight. I pressed my lips together, tasting the remnants of lipstick I'd carefully applied for him hours earlier, never guessing he would use this night to annihilate me. By the time the driver pulled up to our apartment building, I had promised myself I would remember every detail. But let me start from the beginning of that morning, before Jonah's cruelty had crystallized into spectacle. I had woken up with cautious optimism, letting myself believe that my birthday might matter, even in a household where I rarely did. The sun was soft against the curtains, brushing across my arm as if to whisper hope into my day. Jonah was already gone, his side of the bed cold, his cologne lingering faintly like a reminder of absence. I rose, showered, and dressed slowly, savoring the thought of a small celebration that belonged just to us. The kitchen was spotless as always, its gleaming marble counters and stainless steel appliances reflecting my movements back at me. Jonah had insisted on everything: the espresso machine from Milan, the imported tiles, the chandelier over the dining table that cost more than my first car. Yet, despite all the grandeur, the space felt hollow, stripped of laughter, stripped of love. I made myself a cup of coffee in silence, the hiss of steam, the only voice in the room. I thought about the first, tiny apartment we'd shared, where we laughed over burnt toast and cheap wine, a memory that felt stolen from another life. By the time I drove to the elementary school where I taught, I had tucked away my anxieties under a practiced smile. My third graders never cared if my dress was Armani or department store clearance. They just wanted me present, laughing at their jokes and marveling at their stories. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Grant!" they shouted as soon as I entered, their excitement spilling into the room like confetti. On my desk, a pile of homemade cards waited, each one crooked and colorful, some with glitter clinging stubbornly to the paper. Their love was messy, imperfect, and more genuine than anything Jonah's world could ever give. During recess, my colleague Andrea leaned across the teacher's lounge table with a conspiratorial grin. "Big plans tonight?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. I hesitated, then forced brightness into my tone. "Dinner with Jonah and some friends," I said, neglecting to add that the friends were clients, investors, and potential benefactors Jonah had been chasing for months. Andrea tilted her head, reading more than I'd intended, but she only smiled gently and wished me well. The school day ended in a blur of backpacks and farewells, and soon I was driving home again. In our closet, Jonah had already left out a sleek black dress on its hanger, his silent command clear. I stared at it for a long moment before reaching past it to pull out a deep blue gown of my own choosing, one I had bought before Jonah's influence had rearranged my every decision. Its color reminded me of oceans, of freedom, of breathing. I slid it on, fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, and whispered her words into the mirror. "Hold your head high, darling." By the time Jonah returned, I was already in the living room, waiting. He looked me over, eyes narrowing at my choice of attire, but said nothing, just tightened his tie and grabbed his jacket. His silence was worse than criticism. It was dismissal, the kind that drained the air out of a room. In the car, he scrolled through emails on his phone, his face illuminated by the glow of a world where I didn't exist. I stared out the window, clutching my clutch like a lifeline, steadying myself for whatever the evening would bring. We arrived at La Maison Argent, one of the most ostentatious restaurants in the city, a place Jonah adored because every detail screamed exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they seemed to mock gravity. The maitre d' greeted Jonah like royalty, barely acknowledging me as he led us into the private dining room. Jonah's colleagues and their wives were already gathered, their laughter polished, their smiles sharp. I felt like an exhibit being unveiled, an ornament Jonah had dragged along to complete his tableau of wealth. At first, I played my part, smiling, nodding, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, but the conversation drifted into realms I didn't belong to: hedge funds, overseas properties, yachts docked in Monaco. When someone asked me about teaching, Jonah cut in before I could speak. "She just babysits 8-year-olds all day," he said with a smirk, eliciting chuckles from the table. My throat tightened, but I swallowed the words I wanted to scream. Dinner stretched on endlessly, course after course, each dish a masterpiece designed more for show than sustenance. Jonah refilled his glass repeatedly, his charm growing louder, more reckless, his gaze sliding often to the woman seated 2 chairs away. His assistant, whom I hadn't known, would be here. The laughter around me grew sharper, the jokes at my expense more pointed. I smiled until my cheeks ached, though inside I was unraveling. And then Jonah delivered the final blow, the one that would echo long after the night ended. "You're a disgrace," he said, his voice slicing across the table, silencing the room. He didn't shout it. He didn't need to. The calm cruelty of his words landed heavier than any scream, punctuated by his refusal to even glance my way. Chairs shifted, forks froze midair, and the air itself seemed to curdle. I sat still, unable to move until Jonah tossed his napkin onto his plate and stood. "I've got better things to do than watch my wife embarrass herself," he sneered, pushing back his chair. The room rippled with nervous laughter as he walked out, his assistant trailing him like a shadow. The maitre d' approached hesitantly, placing the leather folder before me as though delivering a sentence. My hand trembled only slightly as I opened it and saw the total: $4,278. For a moment, the weight of humiliation pressed so hard I thought I might collapse. But then I remembered the card tucked inside my clutch, the one Jonah didn't know about. I slid it across the table, signing my name with deliberate grace, refusing to let my voice crack when I thanked the waiter. Around me, the guests shifted, avoiding my gaze, already pretending I didn't exist. I rose, adjusted the pearls at my ears, and walked out with my head high. The November air hit me like a shock, crisp and unrelenting. My heels clicked against the pavement as though each step was a declaration, a rhythm of survival. I hailed a cab, ignoring the pitying stares of those leaving the restaurant. Inside the car, I stared at my reflection in the glass, mascara smudged, lips trembling, but eyes steady. For the first time in years, I saw myself not as Jonah's wife, but as a woman, standing at the edge of something new. I didn't go home that night, not to the penthouse that felt more like a stage than a sanctuary. Instead, I had the cab take me to my sister Claire's apartment in Midtown, where the hallway smelled like curry and old paint. Claire opened the door in her pajamas, her face crumpling the moment she saw me, saying nothing as she pulled me into a hug. I hadn't cried at the restaurant or in the cab, but somehow her arms gave me permission. The sob escaped my throat so violently I felt my knees buckle. She didn't ask questions at first, just led me to her couch and wrapped me in a blanket that smelled like her dog, Max. He hopped up beside me, resting his chin on my knee as if he understood I was broken in a way even I didn't comprehend yet. Claire disappeared into the kitchen, returning with tea and a box of tissues, her eyes filled with fury she hadn't voiced yet. Only once the tea cooled in my hands did she speak. "Tell me what he did this time." I told her everything: the dress, the dinner, the disgrace. Her jaw tightened as I described the moment Jonah called me a disgrace, the way he stood up and left me with the bill. He said it so calmly, I whispered, like he was describing the weather. Claire didn't say anything for a moment, but I could see the fire building behind her eyes. "That's the last time he humiliates you," she said, standing suddenly and pacing across the tiny apartment. She grabbed her phone and started typing, muttering under her breath about lawyers, real estate agents, and storage units. I blinked, startled by the velocity of her reaction. "Claire, I'm not leaving him yet." The words tasted bitter the moment they left my mouth. She turned, hands on her hips, voice trembling. "He left you to pay for a $4,000 meal in front of 17 people. I flinched, not from her tone, but from hearing it aloud. It sounded more absurd when she said it, more cinematic, and less like something that had happened to me. "You deserve better than to be some rich man's punchline." Max let out a soft whine as if he agreed. I spent the night on her couch, curled under a fleece blanket while the city hummed outside her window. Sleep came in broken pieces, interrupted by flashes of that dinner, Jonah's voice repeating the word disgrace like a curse. At dawn, I got up and stood by her window, watching the buildings catch the early light. My phone sat on her coffee table, silent. No texts, no apologies. By 8 a.m., Jonah still hadn't called. Claire handed me a mug of coffee and asked what I wanted to do next. I didn't know. All I could think about was how completely he'd erased me from his plans, from his respect, from his life. "It was my birthday," I said finally, "and he planned it as if I were the prop, not the guest of honor." "I think he wanted to break you," she said softly. "But he didn't count on you walking away before he could finish the job." Her voice was gentle, but it carried a weight I couldn't deny. Claire had seen the slow unraveling of my marriage for years, but had never pushed. Now that everything had cracked open, she was ready to help pick up the pieces. By noon, I had changed into jeans and a sweater Claire loaned me and called a car to take me back to the penthouse. "You sure you want to go alone?" she asked, holding the door open as I stepped out. "Yes," I said. "I need to see it for myself. What my life really looks like without the blindfold." Max barked once as if sending me off with a warning. The penthouse was exactly as we'd left it. Perfect, polished, and cold. The lights were off. But Jonah had left his whiskey tumbler on the marble island, a smear of fingerprints catching the light. I walked past it without touching anything, heading straight to the bedroom where the black dress he'd chosen still hung limply on its hanger. I opened the closet and stared at my section. Neutral colors, tailored lines, nothing that felt like me. A wardrobe designed not for expression, but for display. I spent the next hour pulling out everything that belonged to me. Clothes I remembered buying before Jonah, shoes Claire gave me for Christmas, photo albums tucked in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. One by one, I laid them on the bed until I had a small pile that represented the version of myself he hadn't yet erased. I packed them into a suitcase, careful and slow, as if I were wrapping up something sacred. Then I zipped it shut, feeling something shift inside me. I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked older, wiser, and heavier with things they had seen but never spoken. The red dress hung behind me in the mirror, vibrant even in the shadows. I reached for it and folded it carefully into the suitcase, then added my grandmother's pearls on top. These were not things I would leave behind. Before leaving, I walked into Jonah's office and sat in his chair. His laptop was still open to a spreadsheet, some investment projection blinking on the screen. I didn't touch anything, just stared at the numbers, the clean lines of his success. None of this had space for me unless I fit into his margins. I left a note beside the keyboard, scrawled in clean, confident ink. "I was never a disgrace. You just didn't know what grace looked like." Then I wheeled my suitcase out the front door, letting it close behind me with the finality of a slammed book. I didn't cry in the elevator, even when the doorman asked if everything was all right. I just smiled and said, "I'm finally going home." The ride down felt like freedom descending floor by floor. At the bottom, I stepped out into a world that suddenly felt enormous and full of color. Claire hugged me again when I returned, this time with a smile. "So what now?" she asked as she helped me carry my bag inside. "Now," I said, "I find out who I am when no one's scripting my life." It felt like both a vow and a question. But I knew the first thing I needed to do: go back to the school where I was more than just someone's wife. I called the principal and asked for the rest of the week off, citing personal reasons. She didn't ask questions, just offered her support and told me the kids would miss me. I knew they would, because they saw me. They didn't care about status or money or what Jonah thought of me. They just cared that I listened, laughed, and made them feel safe. I spent the next few days in Claire's apartment applying for my own bank account and changing passwords on everything I could think of. Jonah still hadn't called. I didn't know if that meant he was ashamed or indifferent, but either way, the silence confirmed what I'd already decided. I wouldn't wait for an apology. I was done waiting for Jonah to see me. 3 days after the dinner, I finally heard from Jonah. His name appeared on my phone screen while I was folding laundry at Claire's, my hands pausing mid-air. The vibration seemed louder than usual, as if it demanded more than my attention. It demanded my compliance. I stared at it until it stopped, then watched as it immediately rang again. The third time I answered. "Where are you?" he asked, voice sharp and tight. "Safe," I replied, my tone calm, but devoid of warmth. "You made a scene," he said, as if I were the one who'd embarrassed him in public. "You humiliated me on my birthday," I said, "and then you left me to pay for your performance." There was a long pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had that measured coldness I'd come to recognize as dangerous. "I had a meeting the next morning. I couldn't stay while you created drama." The nerve it took to twist my hurt into spectacle made me dizzy with rage. "Do you even know how much that dinner cost?" he asked, as though I hadn't memorized the number. "Yes," I said. "I paid it." The silence that followed was different. It was laced with confusion, maybe even a hint of fear. Jonah wasn't used to me finishing sentences like that. He expected defensiveness, not declaration. "You used my money, I assume," he finally asked. "No," I said. "I used mine." That stopped him. The quiet stretched long and taut before he cleared his throat. "We'll talk when you come home." "I'm not coming home," I said, "and you don't get to decide what I do anymore." His next words came slow and low. "Be careful, Sarah. You're not built for independence. You're emotional. Fragile." "I'm not fragile," I said, my hand tightening around the phone. "I'm just done pretending I'm something less than whole." I ended the call before he could reply. Claire looked up from the kitchen counter where she was chopping vegetables, eyes questioning. "He called?" she asked, voice steady but laced with protective fury. "He did." I nodded. "He's exactly who I thought he was." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the fire escape with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the city breathe in windows and tail lights. Max curled up beside me, his head heavy on my feet, anchoring me to something real. I kept hearing Jonah's voice, the venom beneath the civility, the insult wrapped in logic. But I also heard mine, clear, calm, and finally my own. The next morning, I opened my laptop and searched for a divorce attorney. It felt surreal typing those words into a browser, like summoning a life I wasn't sure I deserved. Claire offered to help, but I wanted to do this on my own, to take the first step with no one else holding my hand. I chose a firm that specialized in high-asset divorce cases, but also had a reputation for defending women who had been financially manipulated. I made the appointment for Friday. Later that day, I received a package addressed to me at Claire's. The handwriting on the label was unmistakable. Jonah's precise, slanted cursive. I opened it with trembling hands, unsure what kind of gesture it would contain. Inside was a single item. The black dress he had wanted me to wear to the dinner folded neatly with a note. "You left this. You'll need it when you come to your senses." I almost laughed. The gall of sending me a dress like a leash, as if clothing could bind me back to obedience. I took it to the dumpster behind Claire's building and shoved it down into the deepest bag I could find. For good measure, I poured a container of expired soup over it. Max wagged his tail like I'd just won something. On Friday, I walked into the glass-paneled office of Marston and Levin with my chin up and my shoulders back. The receptionist gave me a warm smile, not the fake kind I'd gotten used to at Jonah's galas, but the real kind people give when they mean it. My attorney, Ava Marston, wore a burgundy suit and carried herself like someone who didn't flinch easily. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the story. Every betrayal, every dollar, every manipulation. Her nods were sharp, her pen moving swiftly, her gaze steady. "You're not the first woman he's tried to disappear," she said, almost as an afterthought. but you might be the first one who walked away before he finished. She asked about assets, accounts, and documentation. I told her about the joint accounts, the investments I barely understood, and the single credit card in my name that I'd opened with a teachers' union offer. She raised her eyebrows at that, nodding with something like admiration. "Smart," she said. "That card might be your parachute." Ava explained how the divorce would proceed, what to expect, and how long it might take. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Jonah had money, lawyers, and ego. He would not go down quietly. But she also promised me something I hadn't heard in a long time. "You're not alone in this." Back at Claire's, I told her everything. She made us grilled cheese sandwiches and poured wine into mismatched mugs. "So what happens now?" she asked, her feet tucked under her on the couch. I took a bite of my sandwich and let the melted cheddar ground me. Now I become someone who doesn't flinch when she hears his name. That weekend, Jonah showed up unannounced. I was in the hallway bringing up groceries when the elevator dinged, and there he was, immaculate suit, polished shoes, and eyes full of control. I froze. He didn't. "You've made your point," he said, stepping forward as if he owned the entire floor. "I'm not coming back," I said, backing toward Claire's door. "You're being irrational," he said, voice low and sharp. "Let's talk like adults." "We're not equals anymore," I said. "You lost the right to talk down to me." "You'll regret this," he said. "Mark my words." Claire opened the door just in time to hear that last part. "Threats won't work here," she said, stepping between us like a lioness. "This isn't your stage anymore." Jonah's jaw clenched, his nostrils flaring, but he said nothing else. He turned and walked back to the elevator, his shoes echoing against the concrete like punctuation. Back inside, Claire locked the door behind us. "I think he's scared," she said. "He should be," I said, pressing a hand to my chest. "For the first time, I am too, but not of him." I looked at Max curled on the rug, Claire pouring us both tea and the blue sweater I'd worn instead of designer silk. "This is what starting over looks like," I said. "And I think I'm ready." Monday morning, I stood outside Lincoln Elementary with my travel mug in one hand and my staff ID badge clipped to a cardigan that still smelled faintly of Claire's detergent. The school building looked exactly the same, but I didn't. Not inside. I felt like I'd stepped out of someone else's life and walked back into my own. The hallway chatter, the clatter of lockers, the smell of crayons and floor wax, all of it felt grounding. As I walked toward my classroom, the weight of what I had left behind pressed lighter with each step. Sophia was the first to spot me, her backpack bouncing as she ran full speed and nearly tackled my legs. "Mrs. Grant, you're back," she squealed, arms tight around my waist. Michael followed, holding a drawing of a T-Rex wearing glasses. "We saved your chair from the sub," he said proudly, "but she sat in it anyway." I smiled, warmth seeping into a part of me I'd almost forgotten existed. Throughout the day, I found myself anchoring to these small moments, handing out stickers for good behavior, tying a loose shoelace, catching a paper airplane before it could hit the ceiling fan. Teaching had always been more than a job. It had been my proof that I mattered somewhere. When Jonah mocked it, he wasn't just insulting my career, he was erasing my identity. But here, in room 3B, my worth was never up for debate. At lunch, I sat with Andrea in the teacher's lounge, both of us balancing plastic containers on our knees. "I saw that dinner post," she said gently, eyes scanning my face. I stiffened, unsure how much had leaked out into the world. "Someone's assistant tagged everyone, except you." I nodded slowly, remembering Amber's grin across the table, her deliberate whispers, her perfume. Andrea didn't press. Instead, she slid over a granola bar and said, "I'm just glad you're back." Her kindness felt like water in a desert. Not overbearing, just there. I wrapped the bar and tucked it in my bag, as if saving a piece of compassion for later. That night, Claire and I made pasta and watched a rerun of a crime show we used to binge in college. Max took his usual spot at my feet, letting out a heavy sigh every few minutes like an old man tired of the world. At one point, Claire muted the TV and turned to me. "I know this sounds crazy," she said, "but have you thought about documenting everything?" I raised an eyebrow, unsure of her meaning. "Texts, emails, bank statements, anything that shows a pattern," she said. "Jonah's not going to just let this happen quietly." I thought about the years of passive control, the times he'd redirected my choices without making it obvious. "You think he's building a case?" I asked. Claire nodded, her eyes steady. Men like him always are. So I started documenting. I pulled old emails, cross-checked credit card statements, and saved every text Jonah had sent me since the dinner. I made a file folder titled June Fog, an inside joke with myself, because that was the month I married him and the last time I saw things clearly. I stored everything in the cloud, double encrypted, backed up in 3 locations. Ava had warned me that preparation wasn't just protection, it was survival. Jonah emailed me the next day with a subject line that read, "Reconciliation Proposal." I didn't open it for hours, letting it sit there like spoiled meat in a fridge. When I finally did, it was worse than I imagined. Patronizing, manipulative, and soaked in legal jargon clearly written by someone else. He offered a generous monthly stipend, a private therapist to, quote, "help me regain emotional stability," and permission to return to our home under his conditions. I forwarded it to Ava without replying. Her response came within the hour. "This is an intimidation tactic. Do not respond." I felt sick at how calculated it all was, how carefully he was trying to frame the narrative. To the outside world, it would look like he was offering help. But to me, it was another leash with a velvet handle. Claire's friend Megan, a family law clerk, came over that weekend to help me understand the financial documents Ava requested. We spread papers across the kitchen table, each one revealing a piece of a puzzle I'd never been allowed to see whole. "There's a second account," Megan murmured, pointing at a series of withdrawals labeled business expenses. My heart thudded in my chest. "He told me our finances were simple," I said. "He said the paperwork would just confuse me." Megan didn't say anything. She just kept highlighting, her face unreadable. Max barked once from under the table, breaking the silence like a gavel. "This is more than lying," Megan finally said. "It's concealment, and if he moved marital assets without your knowledge, it's also fraud." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The years I'd spent second-guessing myself, believing I wasn't smart enough to understand, suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. I wasn't confused. I was controlled. Ava had called it economic abuse. Now I had the receipts to prove it. That night, I stared at my old wedding ring on the nightstand, remembering how Jonah had slipped it on my finger in front of 200 people, promising forever. It sparkled under the lamp like it still meant something, but all I saw was weight. I slid it into a jewelry box, closing it with a soft click that echoed louder than expected. It wasn't a symbol anymore. It was evidence. Sunday morning, Claire and I went for a walk in the park, with Max trotting happily between us. The city was just waking up. Runners, dog walkers, couples drinking coffee and laughing like nothing in the world could break them. "Do you miss him?" Claire asked, tossing a ball for Max to chase. I didn't answer right away. I watched Max leap, unburdened, untethered. "I miss who I thought he was," I said finally. "But I don't miss who he became." Claire nodded, not asking for more. The breeze lifted the edge of her scarf, and I inhaled deeply, letting the cold morning air fill every part of me. "I think I'm ready for the next step," I added. "Whatever that looks like." We spent the afternoon building a timeline for Ava. Dates, events, financial shifts, emotional escalation. It wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was a record of the invisible damage Jonah had caused. Claire found a receipt from an art gallery donation Jonah had made in my name without telling me. "He used you for optics," she said, disgust curling her mouth. "He made me part of the brand," I replied, "not the marriage." I emailed the completed file to Ava that evening, every page a strike in a battle I hadn't known I was fighting for years. She replied with a single line, "This will make a difference." The idea that my voice could finally matter stunned me. I wasn't just escaping anymore, I was standing up. Monday came with gray skies and a cold drizzle that smeared the windows of Claire's apartment like watercolor paint. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, not because I needed it, but because it made me feel protected. Claire was already up, packing her lunch and tossing Max half a banana, which he caught mid-air with an impressive snap. "Want me to drop you at work?" she asked, sipping her coffee without looking up. "No," I said, sliding my papers into my tote. "I want the walk." The air smelled like wet pavement and diesel, but each step to school felt deliberate, like I was walking into the next version of myself. The umbrella pressed firmly in my hand reminded me of a shield, not just a cover from rain. Outside the school gates, I paused briefly, watching the third graders run inside, their backpacks bouncing like little satellites of chaos. One of them slipped, laughed, and kept going. I smiled despite myself. Children, at least, knew how to recover without shame. Inside, I went about my routine: attendance, math warm-up, vocabulary games. My students didn't ask questions about the week I'd missed. They were too busy arguing over whether shimmer was a noun or a verb. Around noon, I noticed Principal Davis watching from the hallway, arms crossed but face unreadable. When I stepped out during lunch break, she motioned me into her office. I braced myself for bad news I hadn't seen coming. "You doing okay?" she asked, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. The question caught me off guard. I had expected professionalism, maybe even some bureaucratic concern about performance or leave policies. But Davis's voice was soft, human, without any edge. "We don't have to talk about it," she added, "but if you need accommodations or just space, say the word." I blinked rapidly, caught between gratitude and guilt. "I'm okay," I said finally. "I just needed to remember who I was without him." Her eyes flicked with understanding. "If you ever forget again, just walk down to 3B. They'll remind you fast." I laughed quietly, nodding, and returned to my classroom with a lightness I hadn't felt since the dinner. The next day, Ava called with an update. "We served Jonah with a preliminary filing this morning," she said. "You'll receive confirmation by courier later today." I sat very still on the edge of my bed, heart thudding louder than the traffic outside. It wasn't just a theoretical escape anymore. It was documented, filed, and official. "How did he react?" I asked. Ava paused. His lawyer didn't sound surprised. "I think he knew it was coming." I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. "We've also requested full financial disclosure within 14 days, she continued. "If he withholds anything, we'll subpoena." I nodded, gripping my coffee cup like it might steady me. That evening, Claire found me hunched over my laptop, rereading emails from 2 years ago, ones I'd once dismissed as harmless. "You looking for anything specific?" she asked, setting a bowl of popcorn between us. "Patterns," I said, moments I should have seen coming. Max hopped onto the couch beside me, his warm body grounding me again. "You saw them," Claire said gently. "You just weren't allowed to say them out loud." Ava called again on Thursday, her voice clipped but energized. "We found something," she said. "He has a third account." I froze. "It's in the name of a shell company, Westridge Consulting, but the trail leads right back to him." The tension in my stomach coiled tighter. "We'll need your signature to authorize further financial tracing," Ava said. "And once we confirm what we think is there, it becomes a matter for the court." I couldn't believe Jonah had gone this far. Secret companies, hidden funds, layers of deception that now unraveled one thread at a time. "Will this help our case?" I asked. "Immensely," Ava replied, "especially if it's marital money being funneled out." Friday night, Jonah emailed again. This time the subject line simply read, "You win." The message was short, one paragraph of bitter sentences wrapped in faux civility. He accused me of ruining his name, his business, and his reputation. But between the lines, I saw what he wouldn't admit. He was rattled. He hadn't expected me to fight back. I forwarded it to Ava without responding. "Don't engage," she wrote back. "He's baiting you." I stared at the screen, a strange satisfaction blooming in my chest. Jonah, who had once controlled every narrative, was now flailing. And I had done it not with revenge, but with evidence. The following Monday at school, Andrea pulled me aside. "Did you see the news?" she whispered. "Jonah's company is being audited." I blinked. "What?" "It was on a finance blog this morning," she said. Anonymous whistleblower flagged irregularities in their client reporting. I didn't say anything. That night I called Ava and asked if she had anything to do with it. "All I did was submit the subpoena," she said. "But when people dig, they tend to find more than they were looking for." I felt something unfamiliar. Maybe relief, maybe justice. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would come next. I was prepared. That weekend, I sorted through old photographs I'd taken down from the penthouse. some still in their gilded frames, others loose and curling at the edges. I placed the ones that mattered into a shoebox. My college graduation, Max's first day with us, Claire and me at Coney Island. The rest, photos of galas, board dinners, and yacht trips where my smile had always been tight, I fed slowly into Claire's paper shredder. Max watched from his bed, his ears twitching every time the machine whirred. On Sunday night, Claire and I went to dinner at a small Italian place near her apartment, the kind with red check tablecloths and waiters who remembered your name. We didn't talk about Jonah, the case, or anything heavy. We just talked about what normal people talked about. Claire's coworker drama, Max's new obsession with socks, whether or not I should finally get bangs. The laughter that came out of me that night wasn't forced or nervous. It was mine. When we got home, there was a letter waiting in the mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. I opened it under the kitchen light, the paper shaking slightly in my hand. Jonah's words were scrawled hastily. No typeface to protect his dignity. "You've turned people against me," it read. "But I built you. Don't forget that." I folded the letter in half and dropped it into the recycling bin. "He really thinks he made me," I muttered, shaking my head. "Let him keep thinking that," Claire said, tossing her keys into a bowl. "While you quietly prove he never did." I smiled, brushing the hair out of Max's eyes. "He'll never see the end coming." Before I narrate what happens next, kindly let me know what city or country you're watching from and why you haven't subscribed yet. Tuesday morning began with frost on the windows and a knock on Claire's apartment door that made both of us jump. Max barked once before padding to the entrance, ears perked and tail stiff. Claire peeked through the peephole and exhaled sharply. "It's a courier," she said, already unlocking the door. The man handed over a large envelope with my name printed in stark black letters across the front, then left without a word. Inside the envelope was a formal response from Jonah's legal team, 10 pages of legal positioning, half-hearted concessions, and thinly veiled threats about character, appearances, and public perception. "They're trying to frame you as erratic," Ava said when I called her. "They're not attacking your claims. They're attacking your credibility." I sat on Claire's couch, the document in my lap, like a loaded weapon. "They cited your absence from your marital home as abandonment," Ava continued, her tone clipped. "They're saying you left Jonah without cause." My mouth opened in disbelief. "He called me a disgrace in front of 24 people and dumped a $4,000 bill on me," I said. "And that's not considered cause?" Ava sighed. "Not in legal language, not without proof." I stood up and went to the bookshelf, pulling down the box labeled June Fog. Inside were the screenshots, receipts, timestamps, and emails I'd collected over the last month. I scanned the copy of Jonah's dinner reservation, the menu with wine pairings, the text from his assistant Amber confirming seating arrangements. "He didn't just insult me," I said slowly. "He planned it." Claire looked up from her coffee, eyes sharp. "Then it's time to show the court who he really is." By Wednesday, Ava had submitted our response. Detailed, documented, and laced with a quiet fury Jonah's lawyers hadn't anticipated. They wanted drama. We gave them evidence. She included photos of bruises, not physical, but financial, emotional, professional. Email chains showing Jonah cutting me out of decisions, controlling charitable donations made in my name, instructing his assistant to handle optics when I wore the wrong shoes to a fundraiser. Every slight, every subtle power grab laid bare in 12 carefully annotated exhibits. I returned to school feeling lighter, though exhaustion still dragged at the corners of my eyes. My students noticed. Sophia left a note on my desk during art time that read, "You look tired but strong, like a mountain." I tucked it into my planner without a word, holding it like a shield the rest of the day. That small act of kindness felt more affirming than 1,000 fake compliments from Jonah's world. That evening, Ava called again. "I spoke with their office today," she said. "Jonah is pushing for a private mediation instead of open court." My stomach clenched. "Why?" "Because he's afraid of discovery," she said, "and because your documentation is tighter than he expected." I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. Claire and I discussed it over takeout Thai and a bottle of wine she'd been saving since her last promotion. "Mediation could mean faster resolution," I said, stirring my noodles. But also less exposure, Claire shrugged. Do you want exposure or freedom? I didn't answer right away. I stared at the fortune cookie resting on my napkin. I cracked it open absent-mindedly and pulled out the slip of paper. Your silence is powerful, but your voice is unstoppable. I laughed quietly. Well, that's on the nose. Max tilted his head like he agreed. I placed the fortune in the same tin as Sophia's note. 2 days later, I walked into the mediation room flanked by Ava and a younger associate named Mara. Jonah was already seated at the opposite table, flanked by his lawyer and a third man I didn't recognize, probably a strategist. He wore his usual navy suit and smug composure, but he didn't meet my eyes. I took my seat without greeting him. It felt good, refusing him the performance he so clearly expected. The mediator was a woman in her 50s with sharp glasses and a notebook full of tabs. She explained the process, her tone neutral but firm. Jonah's team went first, listing property, accounts, and expectations for settlement. I didn't react. I had trained myself not to flinch at this stage. But when they suggested a clause preventing me from disparaging his professional reputation, Ava sat up straighter. Disparagement, she said calmly. Would that include factual references to his treatment of the plaintiff or just inconvenient truths? Jonah's lawyer hesitated, then adjusted his tie. Mr. Grant is concerned about perception. I leaned forward for the first time. If Jonah's reputation depends on me keeping quiet, maybe that says more about him than me. The mediator raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. Let's keep the tone civil, she said, though her gaze lingered on Jonah. For the next 2 hours, we negotiated. Ava did most of the talking, but I made it a point to speak when it mattered. When they questioned my request to retain the apartment, I reminded them that Jonah had already moved half his wardrobe to a downtown condo registered to Westridge Consulting. When the session ended, both sides agreed to reconvene in a week. Jonah brushed past me as he left, muttering, "Enjoy the apartment, you won't afford the upkeep." I didn't flinch. "I'll manage," I said. Turns out I'm more than decorative. Claire texted as soon as she knew I was done. "You still standing?" I replied, "Taller than ever." Over the weekend, I went through old photos again, this time deleting them for good. I didn't need to memorialize a version of myself that was built around his validation. Every image where I looked out of place or smiled too tightly disappeared with a satisfying click. I kept only the real ones. Me on field trips with my students, me laughing with Claire, me holding Max as a puppy. I uploaded those to a new album titled After. Sunday night, I posted one of the photos to my long-neglected social media. Me in front of the school, holding a bouquet my class had made out of paper. The caption read, "Not every storm is meant to break you. Some are meant to wash you clean." Within an hour, I had messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, college friends, old co-workers, even a neighbor from our first apartment. Most just wrote, "Proud of you." A few wrote, "We saw the dinner clip. We're sorry we stayed quiet." I didn't need their apologies. I had already forgiven them in the act of choosing myself. But it was nice to know people were watching, and this time, not for Jonah's performance. They were watching me stand, speak, and finally live. And I wasn't done yet. The following week began with unexpected clarity, the kind that doesn't come from sleep but from decision. I walked to work under a sky so blue it felt symbolic, my shoes clicking against the pavement like punctuation. At school, my students greeted me with the usual whirlwind of enthusiasm, but even their voices sounded crisper, more grounded. I could hear my own responses better too, less muffled by self-doubt. In room 3B, I wasn't someone's wife or someone's problem. I was just me. Andrea caught me in the hallway after dismissal, her eyes bright with something unspoken. "You saw the article?" she asked, handing me her phone. I blinked at the screen where Jonah's name appeared in bold letters. Private firm facing legal scrutiny after client discrepancies emerge. My stomach tightened as I scrolled, reading phrases like unreported assets, shell corporations, and potential internal whistleblower. "They don't name names," Andrea said gently, "but they will." I thanked her and walked back to my classroom, heart pounding. I sat behind my desk, staring at the chipped corner where Sophia had once hidden a drawing. Jonah's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was rotting from the inside, and now the rot was surfacing. I wasn't surprised, but I was still stunned. The lies he had polished for years were unraveling in public, and for once, I didn't feel implicated. That evening, Ava confirmed what the article suggested. "This is bigger than your case now," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "His firm is under investigation. Your documentation may be part of what triggered it, though the SEC won't confirm." I rubbed my temples as she spoke. "Will it affect our mediation?" Ava hesitated. "Yes, but not in the way he thinks." She explained that Jonah's assets might be frozen soon or reallocated to satisfy client claims. "We need to finalize your portion before that happens," she said, "because once they start clawing things back, everyone gets in line." I pictured Jonah sitting at his glass desk, watching everything slip through fingers that had always been too tight around everything. "Then let's move," I said. "I'm not waiting for his world to collapse to start rebuilding mine." Claire made celebratory pancakes that night, piling them high with whipped cream and slicing strawberries into heart shapes. "You're actually going to win this," she said, passing me a plate. "Not just survive it, win it." Max sat politely by her feet, tail wagging as if he understood the stakes. I smiled at both of them, then lifted my fork. "We're not just getting out, we're getting out with receipts." The next mediation session was colder, more tense. Jonah didn't speak to me directly, not even a glance, and his new lawyer seemed tenser than the last one. They opened with a revised offer, higher, more generous, and with fewer conditions. Ava raised one eyebrow and didn't even look at me before replying. "We'll accept this if it includes full apartment ownership and 0 non-disparagement clauses." The room went quiet. Jonah shifted in his seat, face unreadable. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something that clearly made him flinch. Ava slid a folder across the table, printed screenshots from the financial records I had supplied. "Or we can go to court and let discovery explain these entries," she said calmly. "Your call." They agreed by the end of the day, signatures scrawled faster than anyone expected. The mediator collected the documents and confirmed everything would be filed within the week. Jonah stood and walked out without a word, the door clicking shut behind him with finality. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Back at Claire's, we popped a cheap bottle of sparkling wine and toasted to everything that wasn't him. Max barked at the fizz, then chased a cork across the living room while Claire sang the chorus to a breakup anthem off-key. I sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, and exhaled so deeply it felt like releasing years. I wasn't married anymore. Not in the emotional sense, not in the legal sense. I was free. The next day, I took a detour after school and stopped by my old apartment. The doorman recognized me instantly, straightening awkwardly. "Mrs. G.R.? Miss..." "Turner," I said, smiling. "Just Turner now." He nodded, stepping aside. "It's nice to see you again, Miss Turner." I walked through the marble lobby like a visitor in someone else's museum. The walls felt colder now, the decor more forced. My name was still on the mailbox, but not for long. I had 30 days to retrieve anything I wanted before the unit legally transferred to me. But I knew already. I wanted very little. I took the elevator up one last time, the silence of it humming like a warning. Inside the apartment, it smelled stale and distant, like memory and money. I walked through each room, touching nothing, just cataloging the absence of meaning. The closets were empty. Jonah's belongings already gone, the space echoing with a silence that no longer threatened me. I picked up the emerald scarf my grandmother had given me, left on a hook by the door. Then, I walked back out without turning off the lights. Outside, I sat on the steps for a moment, letting the cold seep into my coat. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo album, the after folder. There was a new picture I hadn't added yet, taken by Claire 2 nights ago. It was me, standing in her kitchen, holding a glass of wine, laughing at something Max had knocked over. My eyes were crinkled, alive. I added it to the album. That weekend, Ava called one last time to confirm everything was finalized. "The transfer is done," she said. "The settlement is filed and approved. You're officially divorced." I closed my eyes as the words washed over me like a benediction. "Thank you," I said, voice cracking. "Not just for the legal part, for helping me remember I existed before him." Ava chuckled. "You didn't just remember. You rewrote the whole script. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, letting it settle. The legal part was done. But healing had only just begun. Claire suggested we take a short trip, just the two of us and Max. Somewhere you've never been but always wanted to go, she said, pulling out a travel website. I hesitated. I hadn't made a choice like that in years, not just a decision, but a desire. Savannah, she said, using my name like a gift. Pick something just for you. I closed my eyes and said, Maine. I've always wanted to see the coast, the lighthouses, the cold mornings. Claire grinned. Perfect. Quiet beaches, small bookstores, and plenty of lobster. Max barked like he approved, then jumped on the couch with both front paws, ready for the adventure. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to dread. It felt like a door I had just learned how to open. We arrived in Maine on a Friday afternoon, the coastline stretching like an unfinished sentence beneath a slate-gray sky. Claire drove while Max sat between us in the back seat, his head occasionally poking forward to rest on my shoulder. The Airbnb was a small cottage perched on a rocky bluff, with cedar shingles and a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. "This is straight out of a novel," I whispered as I unlocked the front door, the scent of pine and sea salt greeting us instantly. Claire dropped our bags and spun in a circle. "This week," she said, "we do absolutely nothing productive." And we didn't. We read books by the fire, took long walks with Max down deserted beaches, and made pancakes for dinner twice just because we could. I didn't check emails, didn't open social media, and didn't read a single headline about Jonah's unraveling. The silence wasn't empty, it was whole. It held space for me in a way his penthouse never had. One morning I woke before dawn and stood barefoot on the porch, wrapped in Claire's flannel robe. The sky was a deep purple, barely touched by light, and the air smelled of driftwood and frost. I watched the first hints of orange curl above the horizon, the ocean below shifting in quiet response. Max padded out beside me, pressed his warm body against my shin, and sighed like a creature entirely at peace. I crouched down, buried my hands in his fur, and whispered, "We made it." Claire joined me with 2 mugs of coffee and handed one over without a word. We sipped in silence, watching as a lobster boat bobbed into view, its engine humming low across the water. "You look different," she said finally, her voice soft, not just lighter, solid somehow. I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my bones. I told her then about the text I'd gotten the night before, a single message from Jonah. "Hope you're satisfied." That was all it said. No name, no follow-up, no attempt at pretending it was about reconciliation. Just those words, bitter and bitterly short. I hadn't responded. Ava had warned me early on that silence would be my sharpest blade. Every time I refused to dignify his cruelty, I starved his control. Claire didn't ask if it upset me. She knew better. "He's not your problem anymore," she said, squeezing my hand. "He's a warning now." That night, I wrote in a journal for the first time in years. Not about Jonah, not about the past, but about what I wanted next. I made a list, messy and imperfect, of everything I wanted to reclaim. Sunday movie nights, a garden, a dog-friendly apartment with a crooked window I could write beside. I wrote down happiness and crossed it out, not because I didn't want it, but because I finally realized I already had it. When we returned to the city, the leaves had turned gold and crimson. Claire went back to work and I returned to room 3B, where Michael had built a popsicle stick scale model of the moon, and Sophia was trying to convince me Pluto should still count as a planet. My classroom felt like a heart with open arms. The staff room greeted me with hugs and gentle questions, and someone had left a sticky note on my desk that said simply, "You are so loved." I tucked it into my after album without hesitation. A week later, Ava called to say the final property transfer had cleared. The apartment was mine, officially and irrevocably. "You're free to move in or sell," she said. "No restrictions." I told her I'd think about it, though I already knew. I didn't want a single echo of Jonah's voice living in those walls. Instead, I found a listing for a second-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a clawfoot tub, just 4 blocks from school. It had a small balcony that faced east and enough sunlight to make plants happy. I signed the lease within a day and scheduled movers for the following weekend. When I stepped inside, Max following close behind, the space felt unfinished. like a canvas. Claire brought over a bottle of sparkling cider and helped me hang the one photo I'd framed, me and Max on the beach in Maine. It wasn't centered perfectly, and we left it that way on purpose. Imperfection is character, she declared, raising her glass. Perfection is control. This is better, I agreed. One evening, while unpacking a box labeled Old Office, I found a sealed envelope tucked between two worn lesson planners. It was a birthday card unopened, addressed to me in Jonah's handwriting. I remembered it now. He'd handed it to me the morning of the dinner, saying, "Open it later. Something to look forward to." At the time, I'd slipped it into my bag and forgotten about it completely. I opened it with steady fingers. Inside was a card with an expensive-looking print of a watercolor garden empty except for one sentence. "Try not to embarrass me tonight." No signature, no love, just that. I burned it in the kitchen sink and watched the paper blacken and curl like dead petals. Max barked once, watching me with wide eyes. "We're done with ghosts," I told him, wiping out the sink, and I meant it. On a cold November morning, I passed a coffee shop where Jonah and I had once fought over something I couldn't even remember. The same barista stood behind the counter, older now, hair streaked with gray. I walked in, ordered a cappuccino, and left a tip that felt like closure. As I sipped it on the sidewalk, I realized something startling. I wasn't haunted, I was whole. The newspaper ran another article about Jonah's firm, client losses, disbarment hearings, potential criminal charges. I skimmed it, not with satisfaction, but with detachment. Justice was being handled elsewhere now. I had already done my part. I had chosen life. That Friday, Sophia gave me a bracelet made of plastic beads, each one a different shade of green. "It's for strength," she said, "like a superhero." I wore it the rest of the day, every clink reminding me I'd survived something that nearly erased me, and now I was making noise again. December arrived like a whispered apology, coating the sidewalks in soft layers of snow that made everything feel gentler. My new apartment took on a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. Coffee brewing while Max barked at squirrels outside, third-grade spelling list tacked to the fridge, jazz humming from the old radio I'd pulled from Claire's storage. Every night after school, I'd light a candle on the windowsill and sit beside it with a book or a journal, not to escape but to mark time. Nothing grand happened in those evenings, but something sacred did. I was learning how to stay with myself. Claire came over one Friday night with peppermint hot chocolate and a knitted scarf in school bus yellow. "I figured it matched your life now," she said, draping it around my neck. I laughed because she was right. It was bold, warm, and impossible to ignore. Max leapt into her lap like he hadn't seen her in years, though she'd been by just 3 days before. "How's Jonah?" she asked cautiously, voice neutral. I hadn't heard from him since the last cryptic message weeks ago. Ava said he was fully consumed by legal proceedings and that client lawsuits were rolling in faster than his team could respond. "His name's been on the news," I told Claire, "but he's a headline now, not a presence." She nodded slowly, understanding the difference. "Good," she said. "Let him be noise while you live in quiet." At school, the winter play was in full swing, and I volunteered to help build the backdrop, paint-splattered cardboard moons and construction paper stars. It was the kind of chaos I loved, full of glitter and mistakes, and accidental brilliance. One afternoon, Sophia held up a script with both hands and said, "I want to read the part where the queen gets her power back." I froze, just for a second, before answering, "Then it's yours." That moment felt bigger than the play. After rehearsal, Andrea pulled me aside in the staff parking lot. "I wanted to tell you this earlier," she said, "but I wasn't sure if it was my place." I tucked my keys into my coat pocket and waited. "I saw Jonah at a conference 2 years ago," she said quietly. "He spoke on a panel about leadership in finance, and afterward he told a story about his wife being too emotional for the business world." My stomach clenched. "He didn't say your name," she added quickly. "But I recognized the way he talked. Polished cruelty dressed as concern." I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I remembered how, after that trip, Jonah came home and praised his own presentation for weeks, while dismissing the cold I'd caught as low-stakes suffering. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Even now, It helps connect the threads. Andrea nodded and touched my arm gently. "You're not invisible anymore," she said. "And you never should have been." That night, I walked Max past the apartment complex, where Jonah and I first lived as newlyweds. The building hadn't changed much. Still beige, still anonymous, but I had. I stood across the street for a full minute, not in mourning, but in acknowledgement. We had started there, but I'd been the only one growing. When Max nudged my leg, we kept walking. The next morning, my principal called with surprising news. "There's an opportunity," she said. "The district wants a speaker for the winter teaching conference." I blinked, unsure what to say. "Someone to talk about resilience in education, navigating adversity, staying rooted." Her voice softened. "I thought of you." My first instinct was to say no, but something in me shifted. "I'll do it," I said. "But I'll talk about more than classrooms." Principal Davis laughed lightly. "That's exactly why I asked." After hanging up, I stood in my tiny kitchen, letting the idea settle. Not just surviving, but speaking. I called Ava that night, just to say thank you. She was between meetings, but paused long enough to hear me. "You didn't just win," she said. "You rebuilt while burning it down." I smiled into the phone. "And I never even raised my voice." The teaching conference arrived a week before winter break. I wore a navy blazer over jeans, and Max's tag jingled faintly in my pocket like a good luck charm. The room held maybe 200 teachers, some of them checking email on their phones, others nodding off from coffee fatigue. But when I spoke about my students, about power, about voice, the room stilled. They listened. I didn't mention Jonah by name, nor the $4,000 dinner, nor the word disgrace echoing through candlelight. But I talked about dignity, and what happens when women are slowly taught to edit themselves out of their own stories. I said, every time someone called me difficult, what they meant was I had a boundary. Heads nodded. Some even stood when I finished. Claire was waiting outside the auditorium, a to-go coffee in hand. "You looked like yourself up there," she said. "Not a version of someone," I smiled, slipping my arm through hers as we walked toward the car. Turns out I was in here the whole time. 2 days before winter break, Jonah's name trended again. His firm officially dissolved, and an ethics investigation launched by the financial board. Claire texted the article link with a popcorn emoji and nothing else. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. His consequences were no longer my closure. That evening, Max and I curled on the couch, the twinkling lights of a modest tree casting soft shadows on the wall. I drank tea from a chipped mug I'd bought at a flea market and reread the notes my students had written for the holiday. One simply said, "Thank you for being safe." My eyes stung, but not from sadness. From knowing I was, finally, safe myself. At midnight, Claire and I toasted with sparkling cider while Max barked at the distant sound of fireworks. "To freedom," she said, raising her glass. "And to never mistaking silence for peace again." I clinked my glass to hers, heart full, to the end of being anyone's ornament. New Year's Day arrived soft and quiet, the sky painted in muted silver, as if even the clouds were holding their breath. I took Max for a walk through the park near my new apartment, his paws leaving prints in the light dusting of snow that covered the path. Children in puffy jackets screamed with joy at nothing in particular, and for once, their noise didn't grate. It comforted. I found myself smiling at strangers, not to be polite, but because I meant it. This year would not begin with survival. It would begin with intention. Back at home, I made a small breakfast and sat at my kitchen table, an old oak piece Claire had found on the sidewalk, and insisted we salvage. I ran my fingers over the grain, imagining how many lives had passed their mornings at it before mine. A blank journal waited beside my coffee cup, and I picked up a pen without hesitation. I didn't write resolutions or revenge. I wrote, "I'm proud of how quietly I rebuilt." Claire called around noon to invite me to a potluck she was hosting that evening. Something casual with friends from work and a few neighbors she liked. "Come early," she said. "You can help me make my legendary spinach dip." I laughed and said I'd bring dessert. Store-bought, of course, because I still couldn't bake without burning something. Max barked from the couch as if approving our plans. "And bring him," she added. "He's basically family now." At the party, someone introduced me as Claire's sister who teaches third grade, and I realized how beautiful it was to be defined by what I chose. Not someone's wife, not someone's charity project, not someone's social liability, just a teacher, a sister, and a woman with a very well-behaved golden retriever. One of Claire's friends, a woman named Dana, struck up a conversation by the snack table. "You look familiar," she said, squinting thoughtfully. "Were you at the fall fundraiser for the school board?" I shook my head. "No," I said with a smile. "I don't fundraise anymore. I just show up where it matters." She laughed and nodded as if that made perfect sense. Max leaned against my leg the entire time, his body a constant, gentle pressure that reminded me I was never alone. Claire came over with a fresh drink and a wink. "She likes you," she whispered. "Careful, she's single and smarter than both of us combined." I grinned and didn't argue. That night, walking home under street lamps that turned the snow to glitter, I let the cold bite my cheeks without flinching. The old version of me would have been afraid to be alone on a night like this, afraid of silence, of memory, of what it meant not to have a hand to hold. But now, my own hand in my coat pocket was enough. Max trotted beside me, leash loose, eyes forward. We weren't escaping anymore. We were heading somewhere. School resumed the following week, and room 3B exploded with pent-up energy and half-finished stories about sledding accidents and too much sugar. Sophia ran to me first thing Monday morning with a new beaded bracelet. "It's your superhero upgrade," she said proudly. "This one has stars." I put it on right away, next to the green one she'd given me weeks before. My wrists sparkled like armor. Andrea stopped me in the copy room to tell me she'd accepted a promotion at a different school. "Bigger district," she said, "but I'll miss the kids here." I hugged her tightly, already feeling the weight of her absence. "You helped me stay standing when I was sinking," I said. "I hope they know how lucky they're about to be." She smiled, wiping her eyes. On a quiet Thursday evening, I opened my email to find a message from a former parent whose son I'd taught 2 years ago. "Mrs. Grant," it began. "Or Miss Turner now, I suppose. I just wanted to thank you. Ben still talks about how you helped him find his voice. We heard about what happened, and I just want you to know you made more of a difference than you probably realize," I replied with trembling hands and a full heart. I didn't explain, didn't recount the headlines or the pain or the courtroom. I simply wrote, "Thank you for seeing me," because for so long, I had lived in a world where being seen was conditional. Now, it was choice. Weeks passed, and Jonah's name faded from headlines and office gossip alike, replaced by newer scandals and fresher mistakes. Last I heard, he'd relocated to another state, trying to rebrand himself through consulting. I didn't wish him ill, but I didn't wish him peace either. What he did was his burden now, not mine. Claire and I started volunteering at a Saturday reading program downtown, helping underfunded libraries build literacy for kids under 10. I brought Max once, and he became an instant mascot, curling up beside kids as they read aloud, offering warmth and non-judgmental silence. "You should write about this," Claire said one afternoon. "What you've been through, what you've found." I didn't answer right away, but the seed planted itself anyway. One Saturday, I pulled out my old laptop and started typing, not with an outline or a plan, but with instinct. I wrote about dignity and resilience, about the cost of silence and the power of naming things. I wrote about the dinner, the dress, the bill he left me with, but I ended it with something else. He left me with the check. I left with my name. I didn't know if it would ever be published or if it even needed to be. Maybe it was enough to know the story was no longer locked inside me. Max sat at my feet as I typed, and I rested one hand on his head while the other kept going. Outside, the late winter light stretched long across the buildings, warming everything it touched, even me. On the last day of February, I stood in front of my class while they recited a poem they'd written together for my birthday. Their grammar. I just clapped and smiled and promised extra recess. That evening, Claire and I watched the sunset from my crooked little balcony with mugs of tea, and Max curled between us like a fluffy rug. "You did it," she said. You made a whole life out of the ashes. I looked around at the chipped paint, the soft music, the little green plant growing on the sill. Not out of the ashes, I said. Out of the parts he couldn't touch. Thank you for listening to Savannah's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.